Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Just to have your attention, please, just the usual general safety announcements. Just take note of the emergency exits. There's one at the side of the hall and one through the doors you came in at the back of the room. As usual, the event is streamed live and a video recording will be made for online broadcast. So please, if everyone, including myself, could switch off their phones so it doesn't interfere with that. And can you also just observe silence at all times? If you need to leave the room during the meeting, just do it quietly. And if you need help, there's a number of authority staff members around the room, so please ask for help. And finally, just, today's meeting is an engagement between the authority and the Garda Commissioner, and the audience are here to observe. So there won't be any opportunity for anyone other than the authority and the Garda representatives to participate. Thank you very much. Josephine.
Thank you, Helen. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Commissioner and colleagues. You're very welcome again to this meeting of the authority in public. Our agenda has been published and we've done a bit of reordering in terms of people's availability and timeline and so on. And we're going to begin with a chat about your monthly report, if that's okay, Commissioner. And our questioning from the authority is going to be led by Noel Brett. So I'll invite Noel to start.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioner and colleagues. You're most welcome. Can I start by thanking you for refining your report further and for placing the additional information on your website, material that you were previously providing in the report. So well done on that. Looking particularly at Section 1 in your report on financing, you flagged there the potential shortfall. You say you have an overspend of about 58 million as of today's date. And you talk about the drivers for that, some of it being a shortfall in your pay budget. And I just wonder if you could clarify for me, what is the actual full year shortfall in your pay budget for 2018, and what is the position for 2019, specifically in context of pay budget?
No, Captain, I don't have the exact breakdown here to hand, but we can get that, and I can come back to you later on in the meeting on that issue. That's for the difference between pay and
yeah, I suppose, Joe, what I'm driving at in particular is earlier on in the year, it was abundantly clear that there was a gap in the pay budget, and I'm really trying to satisfy myself that that's been addressed for 2019, and if it's not, what the plan is.
Sure, so I can answer that second part. So the estimate that's been provided for 2019 addresses that infrastructural deficit that had been in place, that structural deficit that was in place, and we're certainly confident that on the pay side that there's sufficient allocation for us to be able to deliver on our commitments on pay, including recruitment of new staff into the organisation in 2019. So I think and we thank the government for that. I think that issue certainly has been addressed. So whereas there were pressures on the pure pay side this year, we don't anticipate those same pressures to apply in 2019.
So I guess in terms of monitoring by the police authority in 2019 and beyond, we should now be monitoring against a more real budget. That's correct.
Yeah, I think we're looking now at knowing going into 2019 there is an adequate provision made, and it's up to us to be able to assure everyone, including society at large, that we're spending the money appropriately in accordance with the estimate provided.
Thanks, Joe. Commissioner, moving on then to the update you've given us on estate management. Delighted to read of your progress towards the reopening of 6 Garda stations and the plans for each of those. What I'd specifically like to know is where will the staffing come from to open those stations?
I think if you look at the stations concerned, the staffing requirements are very different between Donard, which was it's a small rural village in County Wicklow where the staffing demand is very small. You're probably talking about one person present at a given moment in time. And to somewhere like Stepaside, where the scale of demand would be considerably larger. And as it stands at the moment, the staff, those areas already been policed. What we're talking about here is the reallocation of those resources into the areas themselves. So those, for example, who will be required in Ballinspittle are already policing in the Ballinspittle area, they're just not based there. So we're using the opportunity to provide the opening of the station with that permanent presence that the people in the town and in the rural community will actually see there, the people on the ground. So it's reallocation of people who are currently policing in the area.
Thanks, Joe. And still staying with the topic of estate management, you have a paragraph in there where you talk about the budgetary constraints now starting to impact on your estates programme. How are you prioritising the most urgent critical capital projects?
So there is a capital allocation and an agreement with government around the programme of stations which were prioritised for attention up until the year 2021, 2020, excuse me. And that programme was agreed and provision is made in that regard. But clearly, as we move closer to that period, we need to look again at the stations that will require attention going beyond that period. And as you can imagine, Noel and colleagues, we can't just suddenly land in 2020 and start thinking about where we might need sites or where we might need planning permissions or where we might need the assistance of architectural services to help us in that. So that piece of work has started at a very, very, very preliminary stage. So there's an outline of a range of stations that weren't addressed in the last programme. It's a question of us looking at those stations and reprioritising where they are. And obviously over periods of time, new demands emerge. So there are certainly demands in some of the bigger rural or urban centres where there's been significant population shift. So we would obviously be looking at discussions with our colleagues in the Office of Public Works around those issues as we get closer into that stage. It ultimately comes down to a very strong relationship with the OPW. Commissioner will be meeting with the chair of the OPW in the not too distant future, and there are some of the items that will invariably be discussed.
Joe, and moving on to page 5 on human resources, you provide a very useful breakdown of your staffing complement, and you particularly talk then about the people who are absent for various reasons, such as there's secondments overseas, maternity leave, etc. Would it be possible in future to also get some detail on the number of people who are unavailable for duty because of sick leave, short-term and long-term, and also the numbers of people who are unavailable for duty because they are suspended, and maybe indicate the durations of suspensions? And I know we'll talk more about the Garda Reserve later on, but given that you're outlining your available resource here, I think it would be helpful if we could also see the availability of Garda Reserves as a resource in there. Last time we were in this room, just around a month ago, I was asking about driver training, and I was being told that you'd stopped chief's permissions, so there was nobody driving on a chief's permission. Given that you've stopped that process and you haven't trained large numbers of new drivers, what's the impact operationally, and what progress have you made in the past 4 weeks, 5 weeks since the last meeting on addressing the driver training issue?
I can say in respect to the Chief's authorisation, just because we've stopped Chief's authorisation doesn't mean that we haven't done some training in respect of it. The process with Chief's authorisation was basically to allow people to drive patrol cars at particular areas. What we've done is we've reintroduced or substituted that with what we call CBD1, which allows them to drive without doing the full training course. So they're allowed to go in and drive a patrol car without breaking speed limits or doing chases or anything like that. So we're able to do that. In respect of the driver training itself, Noel, what's after happening in respect of that is that significant progress has been made in respect of where we want to go with it. We have to finalise the documentation in respect of it, and hopefully hopefully at our next meeting here, I'll be able to give you an update in respect of that. But we have moved on considerably in respect of that, and we've good framework done of where we want to go with it. But it is not completed yet, so I'd prefer to kind of maybe stay away from it for the moment.
And are you satisfied, Commissioner, that today you do have an appropriate number of drivers for the range of challenges you face?
Well, I asked the same question yesterday, and my operational colleague sitting at the table assured me that there were sufficient drivers required for the operational demand that we have. We are very aware that promotions are ongoing within the organisation. There's over 400 are on promotion list to sergeant, and inevitably a fair proportion of those will be qualified drivers. So that'll add to the demand. But as AC Síochána has said, we're working through a process to address that. But at this moment in time, in terms of our operational complement of drivers, we have sufficient for our needs.
Thanks very much, and we'll take it up next time, Dave, so
Will you?
appreciate
Okay.
that. Conscious of time and moving on to Section 3 on information and communications technology, I have two areas I want to ask you about in this section. You give a very helpful update on the investigation management system, and there's a sentence in there that says you'll be centrally managing all investigations. Could you explain to me what that means? What does centrally managing all investigations mean?
In essence, what it means, Noel, is that there will be an ability to see the status of all investigations at various different levels throughout the organisation. Currently, as we speak, the investigations that are being investigated in Waterford are kind of seen and managed at district and divisional level. And while somebody from a kind of a governance level can go in and deal with them at an individual level, there will be an MIS element to the investigation management system, which will enable the organisation to ascertain what is the status of all of the investigations, what stage they're at. So it will enable greater kind of MIS information to come out from them to enable, and that will feed into the deployment of resources. But it also will then enable greater governance and oversight of the investigation of crime across the organisation, which is a key, it's our core business. So to be able to do that and to be able to provide greater governance is of considerable importance to us.
So will that system, John, enable more oversight of first and second line supervisors and more accountability up through the ranks in terms of the quality and the compliance of investigations right across the country?
Yes, yes, and the hope is and the intention is that from the governance and accountability arm of the organisation, they will be able to dip sample and they will be able to look at any trends that are emerging so that we can identify them at the earliest possible opportunity to bring in corrective measures. There will always be corrective measures required. There will always be improvements that will be necessary, and this facility will enable us to do that at the earliest possible opportunity, and rather than waiting until it becomes a crisis for the organisation, that we can identify the trends and we can provide data quality, be it from GISC in Castlebar, be it from our governance and accountability section. So there's greater oversight of it.
Thanks very much, John. And still staying with information communications technology, at the end of bottom of page 6, you give a helpful update on the roster and duty management system. And you talk in there about the 14-week trial or the pilot that took place, and you allude to some lessons learned. What were the lessons?
I suppose the roster and duty management system has been piloted in DMR East in the Dunleary area, and one of the issues are logging on and logging off, and we have about 11 to 12% of our people that report for duty don't report at their station where they're located. So if somebody is working at Crowe Park or Aviva, they will report into Aviva. So the complexities of actually having then to log on from a remote location of where there is no log-on system. So that's one of the key issues as to how we do that. And then some of our other people then who do other duties, which don't necessitate them to go to their base station before the commencement of duty. So that's one of the key issues that has come out of it for us.
Thanks very much, John. And then on Section 4, corporate communications, you give a very helpful overview of some of the initiatives that have been been highlighted in the past number of weeks. I particularly wanted to focus on the Criminal Assets Bureau and the work that the Chief Bureau Officer, Chief Superintendent Pat Clavin and his colleagues have been doing in going around the country with such a meaningful and open, transparent engagement with joint policing committees and follow-up in local media, really trying to engage the public in challenging, in providing information and dealing with local crime and criminal gangs locally. I'm just curious to hear from you, how have the public responded? And Commissioner, is there any particular message that you want to send to the public in terms of organised crime and CAB around the country?
Well, firstly, we ought to be rightly proud of the work that the Criminal Assets Bureau takes on. It is really of first class. It's a first class example actually of multi-agency working and cross-government working in terms of managing information and the sharing of information in effect to retrieve the assets from criminal gangs and criminals themselves. In the longer part of the report I referred to their success over the last month. And it's not only the cash that we're seizing, but we're also seizing the lifestyle assets of these criminals. So things like Rolex watches, an Audi Q5 Jeep, and €2,000 in cash were seized. And it's these sort of seizures that keep on eroding the criminal lifestyle and the markers of a criminal lifestyle as well. And that's important because people look up to these individuals and in a perverse manner in terms of them being something that or having a lifestyle that they wish to follow. And it's important that we keep on eroding this image by removing, well, by bringing them to justice, but also then by removing these trappings. So the local initiative has been successful. It has been successful in identifying, I suppose, these lower level players who are still benefiting from a criminal lifestyle and in effect disturbing their ill-gotten gains by retrieving them. And we're very pleased with the work that they've taken on. And there's hardly a week goes by without, in fact, no week goes by without us being informed of some further operation that CAB have taken on in terms of searches and chasing down of ill-gotten gains. And I just highlight that smaller scale seizure, but during the month as well, there's the very large scale operations that we regularly report on as well.
And is there any particular additional help you need from the public in terms of supporting the work of CAB?
Well, I think in particular if they see unexplained wealth, be it in the term either in terms of watches that we've described, but availability of cash or indeed the flash cars, if they report that, that's an indicator of an individual who may be living off criminal means and is using their disposable income to have a criminal lifestyle, one of bling in effect. And so if that was reported, and we do get a lot of reports from the public in any case, but if that report was increased, we would be able to, as I say, erode the confidence of these individuals to gain from a criminal lifestyle. And it is all about the money in the end. And if we can erode that lifestyle, it will have a deterrent effect.
Thanks, Commissioner. And again, just to welcome in Appendix B, you've set out some, and you referred to them there, some really, really tremendous examples of good policing and intelligence-led multi-agency operations. And I think with all of the criticism and all of the focus on the negatives, I think it's tremendous to read, of an officer on the beat, finding a house on fire and going in and rescuing 2 people. It's tremendous to understand about high visibility policing and people actually able to apprehend people fleeing from a burglary, chase people across the field and arrest suspects. And I think it's important that we acknowledge the work that's taking place and the tremendous policing right across the country 24 hours a day. And it's heartening for me to read those. And I want to just conclude by complimenting the community policing and the local Garda stations that have held open days right across the city and right across the country and brought young people and local communities in to see what you do and to build those kind of networks. And in particular, I just finally the Little Blue Heroes initiative, where you had those young children from the Children's Hospital's visit headquarters. I think that's a tremendous bridge building initiative, and I would commend the people who take the time to get involved in those kinds of things, because they're often over and above the day job. And finally, for me then, just to acknowledge the ERU's participation in the International Multi-Agency Atlas Challenge project and their success in that, and also the tremendous simulated major incident exercise you carried out last weekend at DCU. I think those are very good in terms of testing your own capability, but also demonstrating and reassuring the public. And I'm just curious, are there any lessons from the event last weekend that you want to tell us about?
Well, specifically, that is a lessons learned event, and that's the initial run at this, and it was deliberately set up and run so that we would learn lessons. We didn't expect it to be a textbook delivery. There was a lot of different factors thrown into the operation to make it complicated and awkward. So there will be lessons from that, but it'll be a few weeks yet before well, it could be several months actually, to do a full analysis of how it all worked with our partners, and then we will learn from those lessons. But we intend to run the exercise again, so in somewhat different circumstances, but a similar exercise, so we ensure that our systems are up to speed and working well. But the communication and the understanding we have them of other agencies are very important, as well as understand just what the limits of our own capability are at any time and what we might need to do to improve upon that. Can I also just thank you for your comments in respect of the support for Little Blue Heroes. I was down, and we were all down Templemore last week, and it was my pleasure to present a cheque for €12,500 to Little Blue Heroes raised by the students in the college, which was a tremendous effort on their part and very gratefully received as well. But I think it was testament between the connection and care that guards have for their community and demonstrated by the support for this particular charity, and we all wholeheartedly congratulated them on their efforts.
Thanks, Commissioner. And I think Judith's going to just pick up the piece on the public attitude survey from your report.
And very well done on that last initiative. I wanted to ask a question about the public attitude survey, and we know it is a really useful vein of information and a way in which you can monitor performance in many areas, and well done for including it in your report but also publishing it. I think it's really important. But I want to focus on two areas, if I may. The first is around the perception as to whether the guards would treat everyone fairly, because the response is 79% say that you would treat everyone fairly, but when you include don't knows, it goes down to 66%. And the second area that I want to ask you about is satisfaction with service, because I know you are doing some very interesting analysis around that in terms of the differential between those who initiate contact with the guards and those who the guards initiate contact with, that there's a difference in the satisfaction with service in those two dimensions. So can I just invite you to comment on the level of analysis that you're using with the public attitude survey, whether you distill it down to regional and divisional level, and whether that feeds into the performance framework so you can actually hold people to account in terms of their specific performance in those areas?
Yeah, well, can I look to John, please, just for
we can break it down at some level to the regional in each Garda region, and we have provided each regional assistant commissioner with information. Again, I suppose the numbers that are involved in this provide, you know, that it's indicative more so than conclusive. And indeed, we had all of our senior management team in Garda College last week for our biannual conference, when we dealt with one specific issue in relation to information provided to the victims of crime. And while many issues and while many areas and the reports from the survey indicate lots of improvements, there are some areas where we can improve even further. So we spent some time trying to identify what are the causes behind that, and each specific region and each specific area has been tasked with working specifically on an area, and it relates to the information that's provided to the victims of crime, in that while there have been improvements in the other area, this one hasn't. So we tried to understand initially why, and then we've agreed a plan of action as to how we're going to address that. In relation to, similarly with the satisfaction within An Garda Síochána, we have discussed that. We are doing a further piece of work to try and understand what exactly is it telling us. We haven't come to any specific conclusions at this particular time and moment, but it's something we use and we discuss every month. We discuss the findings and results of it, and each region is then tasked with taking them away and addressing the areas where improvement is required. And the victim area is one of them at the moment, and then we're trying to, where the answers are a little unclear, we try and do some further work to understand the reasons behind that.
I think it's something we'd like to get into more detail at committee level, but thank you for that for now.
Sorry, can I just point out the one statistic there, which sometimes I think perhaps we overlook? Victim reporting sits at 76%. Now, that is very credible and compares well with other jurisdictions. And I think, in some ways, that is a strong signal of confidence in An Garda Síochána, in that we have that level of reporting in the first place, and also then friendly or helpful, and community focused are also very strong indicators in bottom right there. And those are something in terms of community focus, but also then effective in tackling crime that we would want to focus on as well going forward.
But it's the difference between those who have had contact with yourselves. The satisfaction level tends to go down, and that's something I think you ought to be interested in and concerned about. But I say we'll turn to the detail of it in committee level. Thank you.
Thanks, Judith. I had actually intended to raise that 76% figure with you, Commissioner, and I think it will be important for us to get below some of these numbers, because the gap between the satisfaction rate of those who simply asked in general, as opposed to those who actually have contact, is something that's worth exploring a little bit more. So for a future meeting, I think we'll do some work in committee and maybe bring it back to a future public meeting. But it is an opportunity as well, I think, to encourage people to report their crime, because you certainly can't have an improvement in detections if the crimes are not, which we're always chasing you about, if the crimes are not supported in the first, reported in the first instance. So notwithstanding that 76% is high, it's an opportunity to encourage people not to be shy about reporting crime to you. Any of my colleagues like to ask anything else on the Commissioner's report? Please, Valerie.
Yeah, just in the last couple of reports, you've started to put in gender breakdown of the staffing, which is very welcome. Just since Noel was suggesting maybe some additions to that, a gender breakdown of the leave categories might be useful too. But what might be interesting at this point is to look at trends in that, actually, to see what direction is the diversity going in. We've had some interesting developments in other sectors in recent weeks, in the higher education sector, where there's positive action, etc. I'm not by any means going down that route for this particular conversation, but I think given that the desirability of having a police service that reflects the community it serves, we've agreed in the past that that's an important area. So just maybe trend statistics might be useful. Okay, thank
Absolutely.
you. Thanks, Valerie. Okay, we'll move on to the next item, which is the reserve.
Okay, yeah.
Charlton is next. I beg your pardon.
All right.
Sorry. We reordered the agenda earlier, and I'm still working off the old one. I beg your pardon. So, who's first? Bob is first. Okay, so we're going to have a conversation about the Charlton report, just for the avoidance of doubt, make it clear to everybody, and including to assure Commissioner, we're not talking about individuals, we're not talking about cases, we're not talking about named investigations. This is a general conversation about themes, emerging themes, and particularly Justice Charlton's recommendations. So Bob Collins is going to start for us, and then Pat will take up.
We're certainly not going to rehearse any of the details with which the report dealt. As the Chair said, probably to consider what it may say about the Garda Síochána, what we already know from other reports, and what actions should and will be taken. The report says that the Tribunal has been about calling the police to account, which is exactly the public service that the law requires us to discharge through these public oversight meetings. I think it's also one of those rare reports which reveals greater richness and depth with repeated readings. Some of your own public comments, Commissioner, have been very, very welcome. But as the Christian Bible says, by their fruits ye shall know them. And I suppose the question to begin with is, what is it that you think needs to be done? What is it that you will do? And what are the fruits by which you would want yourself and the organisation to be known in the way in which it responds to this report and all that it represents?
Thank you. In reading this report and the actually the vast majority of the report we can't discuss here, but when you get towards the tail end of the report where Judge Charlton talks about one of his recommendations and then two, most powerfully, I think, his obligations. And it's a series of 7 obligations that he places on Garda Síochána. And I have said in public that I regard those very much as being written to me, and indeed that's how I read them. So I think for my part in this, as Commissioner, I've said entirely that I've accepted the report in its entirety and without equivocation. And that means then accepting some very critical comments. And he's made very critical comments about where we see our duty is. And our duty is to the public, to the victims of crime and the taxpayer. Our duty to Ireland is above group loyalty, meaning group loyalty towards Garda Síochána. And that lesson badly needs to be learned by our police force. And a lot of that is directed towards the senior management. So for my part, I think then what I need to concentrate on is the behaviours and standards then within the organisation, and how then we go about living up to what Charlton and indeed the public expect of us. There's conversation around, or there's mention made of in terms of how we react to justified criticism or feedback. So do we have, in effect, a reflective culture which thinks about black box thinking? Do we apply that to our workplace? And he contrasts the evidence given between Garda Síochána and Tulsa, for instance, in terms of that black box reflective thinking on the quality of what our evidence was to the tribunal. And also then he comments on the open-ended obligations, and in particular then taking pride in work and our uniform, always to be honest, visible, to be polite, but also then, most importantly, our duty to society and our duty to serve the people of Ireland. And I think what they expect of us is one around a police service which is grounded in a policing service which is grounded in the European Convention of Human Rights, which takes very responsibly then the Code of Ethics. I think then it has to be an organisation of leaders. It's not just down to me. I have a very important role, but I also have a role in ensuring that there is appropriate autonomy and responsibility and delegated authority within the organisation. So people take responsibility for the work that they undertake, for the service delivery that is undertaken in the organisation, and that they work then within a corporate framework around the behaviours and their individual and indeed group or division district performance, and that they're held to account for that. So that it is an organisation, in effect, of leaders, people to take responsibility for their actions, and then can be held to account for those actions in a very clear and transparent way as well. And the part about accountability, I think, is the one which is most clear. So we are being held publicly to account today. We've been held publicly to account in this tribunal, and as steel sharpens steel, this is healthy for the organisation in terms of honing what our service should be to the public in terms of our service delivery, built on the strong cores of European Convention, the Code of Practice, then the behaviours. And I've said repeatedly to my own team in public and in private that we must be exemplars of the behaviours that we expect elsewhere in the organisation, and we have to live by that example. And there's a lot talked about cultural change, but I think the first place I want to think about is the behavioural change, and then what is the business change that I wish to see as well in terms of our service delivery. So a responsive policing service, held to account, and people having trust and faith in it.
And I'll come back to a number of those points that you made, in as much as they referred to issues that were in the report. But are there specific things that you have been doing or that you propose to do to deal with the issues that present themselves to you in this report in relation to the organisation?
Well, I think the first thing we have to look to is just it's referenced throughout the report and indeed back into the Morris report. So we are a disciplined organisation, and we we have to act in a disciplined way. We work within a corporate framework, and we're well into the 21st century. So actually, that discipline means self-discipline and adherence to open-ended obligations and behaviours. And I think that our present discipline code, and it's the discipline code we all have to use, is ripe for modernisation and bringing that forward. But the most important thing as well is that we're seen to our workforce as well as an organisation which supports them, which is an organisation which is open to criticism from without and within, and therefore then we're able to make strides forward. So it's about actually what the workplace is for staff within it as well, how they feel within in the workplace, and what we're doing in terms of learning and development and support. So discipline's an important part of that. I would say now in the 21st century that's more about self-discipline, as I've said, against a set of standards or behaviours and open-ended obligations as the Charter and Tribunal sets out. But undoubtedly our present discipline code is in need of updating.
As you suggested yourself, and as we know, this is the most recent. I'm sure you hope it's the last in a line of reports. And Mr. Justice Charlton said that the difficulties or issues his tribunal were dealing with were the same kind of trouble that was identified a dozen or more years ago by Mr. Justice Morris. Now, I know absolutely that you've been in your office in the organisation for just a little less than 3 months. But can you be confident that the behaviours that were identified and dealt with in this report are not happening in other parts of the organisation? A question similar to the one I asked your predecessor in the context of the publication of the O'Higgins report.
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer in a definitive. And so, you're saying to me, are you certain? And no, I'm not certain. And in fact, actually, both reports highlight the risk that this isn't isolated, and that Garda Síochána and I as Commissioner need to be on our guard that this is happening elsewhere. And it would be foolish for me to ignore that advice, and I've taken that on board and in the way it's meant for me to take. There is a serious deficiency has been highlighted in this tribunal inquiry. The faults that it outlines were deep-seated, and so we collectively, and myself, have to be aware that the risk of this still arises in terms of a very negative culture, breeding very negative behaviours somewhere in the organisation. To counter that, then, we need to have a very strong basis on which we set out what our behaviours are, and I've talked about the Code of Ethics, but also then, strong processes by which we support those who may wish to come forward and raise issues, so that they understand that that can be done. And indeed, that happens now on a regular basis, and people are dealt with appropriately in terms of coming forward, raising issues. And in effect, then, a healthy organisation deals with those issues well and allays fears and follows through on building a relationship with that employee, and that's what we're all about now. But both reports, the Morris Tribunal and Charlton Tribunal, highlight that this may not be an isolated incident, and as I've said, it'd be foolish to ignore that opinion.
I really do appreciate the frankness and the reality of that response. When you mention behaviours, one of the behaviours, or perhaps non-behaviours, to which a particular reference was made in the report was that when the Tribunal wrote towards the end of 2017 to 430 officers at the level of Assistant Commissioner, Chief Superintendent, and retired officers, only 2 replied with any relevant information. Does that cause you to reflect? How do you respond to that in terms of how did that strike you when you read that?
Well, it has caused me to reflect, and I have to thread my way through this in terms of we haven't finished our analysis of this, and I wish to look at that more. I know underneath those figures that there are many explanations, and indeed some individuals had no contact whatsoever, and I feel in this public forum that I shouldn't go much further at this, just at this moment, Bob.
And I thank you for that. One of the things that the report also says is that the soundness of any organisation may usefully be judged by the reaction it has to the mistakes it makes. And he speaks eloquently, Mr. Justice Charlton, about the good work being done by so many in the Garda Síochána and in other public services, as he put it, with humanity and skill. But he says that of the Garda Síochána that within an honest setting, those responsible for such derelictions of duty would admit the matter readily. And he says the Gardaí offered no criticism of themselves. And I wonder what is it that you think needs to happen in the organisation to encourage, indeed to require, that people acknowledge, at whatever level they are, they acknowledge where things have gone wrong and do the right thing thereafter. How do you think that self-awareness can be developed? That sense of responsibility inculcated in the organisation? Are there things that you think need to happen so that there will be a willingness, a readiness to accept that things may not be as they should be?
Well, I think you want, and in terms that's a behavioural change. And if you want to see that behavioural change, then in part you have to live that yourself. But also for those who are prepared to put their hand up and say, well, here's something that went wrong, I'm flagging this up, this is what can be learned from this, or whatever the consequences might be, you're seeing that they have actually been supported in doing that and seeing that through. The expression which is used is black box thinking, and that's where we want to be in terms of continuous improvement. And so do something, go through the review circle of evaluation. What else can be done better? What would we do differently in the future? And that's all of us, and all that we're doing here should be an sort of continuous cycle of what are the improvements we seem to make here. We're in a very complicated business. A huge array of services are supplied by An Garda Síochána across the whole continuum of crime and disorder and state security, and therefore then in every area of the business, we need to have that thinking. And in part that comes from the amount of authority individuals think they have and the amount of responsibility that they feel they have as well. So it's not just about authority and responsibilities for chief supers or superintendents, it's also Gardaí themselves, sergeants and inspectors feeling their level of responsibility and their responsibility to make a difference in terms of continuous improvement. And it's it's the black box thinking that keeps us safe in the air, and we have to apply that same ethos within. And we spoke at this last week at the Commissioners' Conference on Thursday and Friday, and it's just the beginning really of a conversation. We are going through a process of setting out and consulting on a new vision for the organisation, and from that then obviously a strategy will flow, but part of that strategy is around how we communicate that to our staff and how we inculcate the behaviours that we wish to see of them. And in part then, I have to loosen the reins of my control as Commissioner and then be more content to be operating within an organisation of a corporate framework which provides guidance and allows others then to make fast time decisions in their areas of responsibility, be it operational or HR, finance or whatever.
And I suppose an acknowledgement of the essential strength of acknowledging a mistake and the power of the words "I'm sorry."
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
I'm conscious that we're having this discussion about these issues 2 days after you were awarding medals to members of the organisation in respect of their performance of duties overseas. And how do you think that organisations can coexist at different levels, where these things can happen that have been the subject of discussion or of analysis and report in this tribunal report and in other reports, and at the same time you have the quality of performance that you were acknowledging and that you were publicly rewarding?
2 days ago I awarded 16 UN service medals, and it was really a fantastic occasion. 12 for service in Cyprus and 4 for service in Kosovo. And there is this. There's you're running two thought processes at any one time, because you're reading the Charlton report, and Charlton himself is conflicted, because as well as highlighting things which he found to be entirely unacceptable and the public found to be entirely unacceptable, he also identified very professional, positive work. And similarly, we were talking about the Charlton report, and in the back of my mind also then was the fact that our officers are sought after in terms of international work. They make a real difference in terms of restoring the rule of law and in very difficult circumstances, and they are dealing with very difficult investigations. In particular in Kosovo, our staff were leading on difficult war crime investigations, including genocide and serious sexual assault being used as a weapon of war. So, most heinous crimes, and leading those investigations. But that's part of the character of the organisation. We have strengths in terms of our community focus and the support we have for the community, but we also have strengths in terms of the people we have in the organisation and the job that they can do. And I think my responsibility is setting very clearly the corporate framework within which the workers have said, but also then what are the behaviours expected of all, and then the manner in which those are reinforced within the organisation.
Two final questions from me, and probably not requiring very lengthy or substantive answers, well, lengthy answers anyway, substantive I hope. This report, as did the O'Higgins Commission report before it, identifies weaknesses in internal reviews or internal investigations undertaken by the Garda Síochána, and that by the organisation that has all of the investigative powers of the land. And the report says such investigations can fail to come up with an entirely appropriate conclusion. Are there things that you want to do, reflecting on that, to establish a new norm within the Garda Síochána?
Well, one thing in particular that I think we are thinking about and we're working through is terms of what our approach is to anti-corruption within the organisation. So we are working through what a policy would be around anti-corruption, and then that will give us an indication of what the scale of the issue is with the organisation or within Garda Síochána, and then how we would address the problems that we find. We obviously, and it's regularly reported, we obviously investigate internally, both serving members of the Guards and also support staff, and do bring them to justice. But I want to be sure of an organisation of this size that we're properly on front foot in terms of our anti-corruption approach, and that's one of the things that I want to do and want to do over the next number of months.
Yeah, and needless to mention, I wasn't suggesting that any of the weaknesses there may have been in internal reviews or investigations were as a consequence of any corrupt behaviour. It was just that in the Garda Síochána, of all places, that reviews or investigations received the kind of commentary that they did from these tribunals.
It may be in part that, and it's the earlier comment made in respect of our own discipline procedures, do require a modernisation and some simplification beyond process.
The final thing I was going to ask you, Commissioner, is that politeness is a very simple word, but this report invests it with an entirely new significance. And what do you have to say about the extent to which and how that everybody in the Garda Síochána, whatever role they have, will relate to their colleagues and their fellow citizens and residents of the country with that fundamental virtue of politeness?
Well, it's to be entirely expected by everyone that I employ that they should be polite in the workplace and also polite in their dealings with the public. And the public that we serve are entirely entitled to expect that they will be dealt with in a civil and courteous manner, and in fact, in lots of ways, that makes your job a lot easier when you're actually dealing with the public. And but we want to be clear about that in terms of the behaviours, both within and outside the organisation. I have to say, from my own experience, and even turning up unannounced at various stations, etc., I've been met with unfailing courtesy. I would say that because I'm the commissioner, but we just want to be sure that the people that we bring in the first place, and also then those that we have, are unfailingly polite and courteous in all circumstances. It's the right way to behave.
Thanks, Bob. Pat.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Commissioner, for the answers. You mentioned behaviour, and you also referred to the Code of Ethics. So I'd like to have maybe a discussion around culture reform and the role of the Code of Ethics in that. And I think cultural reform, I think we'll all agree now, it was important before the Disclosures Tribunal, but it's even more important now on foot of the Disclosures Tribunal. I think we all recognise that cultural reform is hugely difficult for any leader. We recognise that. It is not easy. We also know, though, that it is possible. It is possible to achieve it over, with a strong beginning and over a relatively, you mentioned 5-year period, and I'll come back to that later on. But I think it is important to get off to a good start, and that you have around you and throughout the organisation exceptional leadership. I just want to remind ourselves of what your own members are saying. So while we're talking about the Disclosures Tribunal, your own members, what they said, just very briefly. First of all, there were a lot of good things. 6,500 completed the survey, a survey that took quite a while to fill out. They were very strong on community engagement, and we all know that. Very strong on and valued relationships with their immediate team and friendships with their colleagues. And they were all the strengths of what your members were saying. But in terms of weaknesses, I suppose it doesn't make pleasant reading. The unwritten rules were befriend the right people. It's all about who you know. Promotion is based on who you know. Keep your head down. Don't challenge and cover your back. And some of the culture insights are small is beautiful. That's referring to the small team, immediate team. Silence means survival. One rule for me, another rule for others. It's all about who you know, and that there is a supervision vacuum. So, it is, I think, culture reform is really, really critical now in Garda Síochána. And I know from listening to what you've said so far, it is very high up on your agenda. But could I ask you my first question? How do you plan to address the issues in relation to behaviour, culture reform, that were identified by your own members and also came out in many cases in the Disclosures Tribunal?
Well, a lot of which is identified seems to be in respect of favouritism, or as also been described as nepotism as well. So, and these unwritten rules about who you know as opposed to what you know, I'm totally opposed to that, and I wish to see a meritocracy within the organisation. And so we have the process by which you appoint superintendents, chief superintendents, and indeed they make recommendation for the appointments of myself and the rest of the team sitting here. So that's beyond reproach, and we then want to make sure that our sergeant promotion process and inspector promotion process is also beyond reproach. So in order to do that, and a very late development is we've picked up on your own good practice around the application of vetting to the lists which are produced for promotion, for instance. Also then, I think we're within weeks or one senior leadership team meeting from approval for a new promotion process. And so the much maligned process of double boards will be changed to a process driven by, in effect, psychometric testing of which will identify those, who with the possibility of taking on either front-line or second-line supervision for sergeant or inspector. So that brings an element of objectivity to the process. So once we start to see that within the organisation, then hopefully those attitudes, that's a change in organisational behaviour, which will then hopefully be demonstrated in terms of the attitude change that we'll wish to see within our staff. And beyond that then, we've often talked about the Code of Ethics. Every member, every senior member of the organisation is now signed up to the Code of Ethics, all superintendents, all chief superintendents, and all of us sitting here. You have to sign it before you move on to the next rank. And I've said already about the vetting process that we've applied as well to the sergeant and inspector list. So there's lots of ways just to chip away at this very negative narrative that there is in the organisation around favouritism and who you know. Okay. And in terms of speaking up, I think what is very evident from Charlton is the importance of speaking up. In the end, Maurice McCabe did a great service in terms of flagging up these issues and allowing those that of us remain in Garda Síochána to learn from that and to develop the organisation further in terms of the policing service that it provides and ensuring it has the correct focus. And there is a little bit then about just what motivates people, and I would expect all of my staff, and certainly those who seek advancement in the organisation, to be motivated by a selfless service to the public, and our service is policing, and that they should be devoted to that and be there for the right and proper and ethical reasons, and that their behaviours then should follow through on that. And I'll be very rigorous in terms of the application of those behaviours as well. And I think if I set the right tempo, then hopefully then others will follow suit, because that makes it clear what is acceptable and not acceptable in the organisation.
Okay, you do mention the training and the signing up, and I want to compliment Assistant Commissioner Pat Lee and his enthusiastic team and your people in the college. A lot of work has been done. There's a lot of work left to do. 12,000 of your people have signed, and about 7,000 have received training, and 7,000 odd have certified that they got the training, understood the training, but most importantly will abide by the code. So how does that fit, with the change in behaviour and the acceptance of the code when there are so many people who are so far reluctant, or perhaps as strongly as refusing to sign, or have not yet signed the Code of Ethics and agreed to abide by it? It's quite serious, I would have thought.
I very much recognise the dilemma that you pose for me, and one approach into this is that, in effect, I ask that it is signed and directed, and I'm not going to do that. I want to do this by way of persuasion and understanding, and I think one of the routes into that is with the staff associations. So both John and Joe and I will be meeting shortly with GRA and AGC in terms of not just the Code of Ethics, but one of the lead items will be the Code of Ethics and their view of that, which has driven some of the attitudes and the attitudes around signing or not signing up to the Code of Ethics. At the same time, my view is that if you wish to take on further responsibility of any nature in the organisation, then you do need to signify that you sign up and you understand the behaviours within the organisation. It's not been used as a stick in terms of another appendix to our discipline code. It's not there. It's there as a guidance, and I want to make that clear to individual members. But we are at the place of persuasion and trying to increase understanding of why it's there. In lots of ways, the publication of the Charter Tribunal gives a very clear rationale as to why it's so important.
Okay, look, we do welcome the progress that's been made, and we welcome the sanctions, the implications of not signing up that you're strong on. That's good. You did refer to speaking up, and I suppose the question I have for you is, how are you going to ensure that there is a safe environment for all your members to speak up? And when I talk about speaking up, it's not just about protected disclosures, it's about speaking up in everyday interaction with their superiors and with their colleagues, that they speak their mind, and which will help you and all your leadership team. So, and whereas the members themselves were saying, keep the head down, quite the opposite of what you would actually want.
Yeah, I'm a colleagues here. We can't be in every interaction, so we have to set out what exactly we expect of the interactions which happen in the organisation, and we have to continue just to reinforce the messages with with everyone in Garda Síochána about how we expect, in effect, you know, justified criticism or positive feedback or whatever description you might put to it is treated within the organisation. We want to be a learning organisation. Black box thinking is the expression which is applied. That's certainly where we want to be, but we have to make it clear that that is wanted in the organisation. It's not just a question that it's accepted, it's actually wanted. That's where we'll see service improvement and you know, and almost fleeting opportunities are grabbed for the opportunity for improvement.
And I've heard you speak about you know, some of the things you want to see happening. At this stage, have you written down, if you like, what your desired culture for An Garda Síochána you want to instill within the organisation? Just wondering, have you done that yet? And if you have, how are you communicating that throughout the organisation? And maybe on what response are you getting?
Well, I did prepare a presentation for the superintendents and chief superintendents last Thursday and Friday, and that was based on, in part, the learning from obviously the Charting Tribunal, but also then the way forward in terms of what I expected. And pretty much it is based on what I've said already, that I'll provide a corporate framework in which they will enjoy autonomy to make decisions, make their operational decisions, but within corporate guidance. And in doing so, then they'll be delegated authority and responsibility to take the decisions which are entirely appropriate at their level. And that is actually then, in effect, given it's a culture of trust, and the trust is giving them responsibility to carry on in terms of their day-to-day functioning and work, make appropriate decisions without having to think that I or others are constantly watching over their shoulder. Obviously, they need help and put up their hand, ask for help. If they need other guidance, that's fine. But I trust that they will do a good job and in effect, you know, give the taxpayer a good day's work in return for the money they're paid. You want to capture people doing good things? Absolutely. Yeah, that's good. A few other, and I'll finish fairly quickly, a few other questions. I asked you, in running the job a few weeks, what was the biggest challenge for you in terms of achieving reform of culture, and you said communication. Communication was your biggest challenge. And I'm just wondering, 2 months later, how are you getting on with that communication? And do you still think it's your bigger challenge? Or have other challenges arisen? No, it remains the biggest challenge. And actually, I think even the conference that we had last Thursday and Friday was, you know, a practical illustration of that. And you know, it was an illustration to me, just how the messages are landing, or indeed how they're not landing. And so I think these conferences happened, you know, every 6 months. We're going to have to increase the frequency of that interaction over the next period, so there's a thorough understanding of what I expect, but also I have a fair understanding of what superintendents and chief superintendents expect in terms of the support they'll get from me and my colleagues here. But also then we're going to have to enlarge that further down into the other ranks as well. Communication remains the biggest issue, because that is what ties whatever strategy we determine to the actual practical impact on the ground. That understanding comes from the communication. I think it would be a good idea, though, to define, and are you going to be continuously refining your communication of what the culture you want to set within the organisation? Well, you're not going to get everybody by a conference? Or? No. Well, in fairness, we haven't decided on our vision. And once we decide on our vision, then that tells us our strategy, and from that we'll present a policing plan to yourselves in the new year. My worry with leaving it too long is that a new leader, you're at your almost your most influential in the beginning. People are looking to you. What culture do you want to set? And that's what they're trying to gauge. Yeah. I'm just wondering, is there any actions you've taken, and I know you have some, I could maybe mention some, let you mention them, that you've taken so far or about to take that would indicate to your members that things are going to change around here in terms of culture reform? Oh, well, I think a couple of things then is just, as I've said, focus on behaviours, focus on the corporate governance, you know, lifting our horsepower around internal audit, risk management. So the big things that I have to do within the organisation. Beyond that then, what our operating model is, because our operating model is conducive to delegated authority, and our practice has been that a lot of lot of command and control and power is held at the centre and at the top of the organisation. So that has to be broken down. But you know, I know it's the illusion of 100 days, but you know, every day is your next 100 days. You know, so there's you don't arrive and then slow down. The inertia wheel, in effect, should speed up, and you gain more and more traction over time. That's the way I see it. You know, the early arrival and what happens initially, I think, some ways is a bit of an illusion. An organisation this size, I need to understand entirely what's going on. I've got big pieces of work to deliver, and you know that's going to consume 5 years very quickly.
Yeah, and you said the last time we spoke that you were confident you would achieve cultural reform within 5 years. So I expect that's still your line, that you will achieve a lot in 5 years.
Well, I can achieve a lot in 5 years, but I think for all of us, we're also preparing the ground for the next man or woman who take over from you as well. Yeah. So I have to be very conscious about the foundations that I put down, that they're sustainable.
It's a never-ending story, and it's a process of continuous improvement.
But an institution like An Síochána will last, and yeah, you know, will outlast us all. So the foundations that you put down are exceedingly important, because that culture and those behaviours within the organisation last for a long time and long after you're forgotten.
Excellent. It'll be a great legacy to leave. My final question: you mentioned at our last meeting about you would be focusing on developing your people. Professional development. Have you given that any further thought in the last 2 months?
Well, yes, I have, and it's in some ways I want to think about, and in particular what I have been thinking about is just how we open the organisation out to more outside influence, both outside the jurisdiction and also within the jurisdiction. Where else can we go to see experience of big organisations, not necessarily in public service, but public service is good, but also then, you know, sisters policing organisations elsewhere in the world that we can draw upon as well. And I've been very fortunate in the interim. I've been able to secure 2 places on the Strategic Command course in the United Kingdom for 2 officers to attend. So, but that's just the beginning. I think also we need to think about the relationship north-south, and particularly with all that Brexit has thrown up, and what our relationship there is, and be more outward looking towards that, and revisit and reinvest in that relationship, particularly at this time of some uncertainty.
Okay. I look forward to hearing your message, by the way, in your promotional videos to the internal and external, and also look forward to seeing the decision-making model with the Code of Ethics right at the centre, seeing that being rolled out.
Yeah.
Thank you for all your answers.
Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. One of the related questions relates to the protected disclosure policy, which is something that you mightn't be aware of, but the authority reviewed fairly thoroughly in 2016. And I know you have a final review underway, but I think as part of the response to Charlton, it would be important to finish that review of the protected disclosure policy fairly promptly. There were some recommendations made by the authority which were sort of hanging there, and things like the location of the protected disclosure manager and issues around that, and the consultation with staff associations, which I know is being pursued, but it would be important to pursue it to a conclusion, and I think it could form a very fruitful part of your response to the Charlton report, because essentially it all started in many ways with disclosures and the protections or not that arose. So we'd like to encourage your colleagues will brief you on it. I'm not expecting you to answer that question.
I think Joe can give an update.
The Executive Director of Legal Compliance has taken responsibility for this and is very exercised about bringing the matter to conclusion. And a couple of pieces that come from that, I agree, Josephine, it hasn't just been about protected disclosures, as Pat said. It has to be beyond and broaden around that. And the sorts of issues that you've referenced around location of PD managers is one in which, you know, is certainly, you know, in place as part of the consideration. We've been asked for a short extension by one of the representative bodies who wanted to take findings out of the Charlton Tribunal to enable them to feed more into it. We've given that, but we are very anxious to bring the matter to conclusion sooner rather than later, and we'll certainly update it.
And I do think it is actually timely. If you had finished it, you might have to revisit it.
Yes.
but at the same time, I think, revisit it to a conclusion. Thanks for that, Joe. We're going to move on now to discuss Garda Reserves strategy, and Valerie's going to lead for us.
Thanks, Chair. Okay. Maybe before I do, just to pick up on one or two things. Pat mentioned there the importance of communications, and I'm always conscious the extent to which in public service, large public service organisations, the extent to which employees often hear messages through the media before there's time for you to get the message, and equally our own message. And I suppose if there is a message from the authority, it's to echo what Noel said earlier. We tend to focus sometimes on the negative here, and we don't emphasise the huge positives. I think it's really important that we do that. And I suppose to say to everybody, it's in the interest of, just having a really excellent police service that we focus on the areas that maybe require attention or improvement. So I would think we all want to basically thank every Garda member and every Garda member of staff, and also every Garda member of the Reserve, which is a part of your organisation that doesn't often get a lot of focus and probably deserves some. So maybe just a few minutes on the Reserve. Now, I know your HR strategy that we discussed the last day, I think it's nearing completion at this stage, and I think you'll be addressing the Reserve strategy within that. So I suppose, first of all, we're looking forward to that, and we're looking forward to seeing whatever plans come out of the HR strategy being synced with the policing plan in January. So I know we'll have further discussion at that point. But it might be just useful at this point to spend a little bit of time just considering the role of the Reserve and your own views at this stage, because we know the Reserve strategy has been through a number of drafts, and thinking, there's been lots of exploration. So just from your own point of view, Commissioner, do you think at this stage the organisation has a settled view really at this stage on the role and the purpose and the value of a Garda Reserve? And what's your own personal view on this?
Oh, well, I think we need to settle down with clarity on what their role is in the first place, because then that determines then their understanding of why we wish them to volunteer and why then we wish them to give of their time as well. Mm-hmm. So what is operationally and tactically viable for them to do, what duties for them to undertake, and there are very valuable duties that they can provide, particularly in and around visibility, big events, nighttime economy, and even run into Christmas here when we wish to increase the visibility in our commercial centres. So there's very useful work that can be done, but it is volunteer work, and we need to be upfront in explaining this is what it is, and this is how good it is, but this is the limits of it as well. We have good practice within the organisation internally. We've discussed how we take those lessons and share them then around the rest of the organisation. So that's underway. And we've also then try and keep up to speed with, or keep pace with some of the cessations that we've had. We have sanctioned the recruitment of a further 100 individuals in the new year as well to the Garda Reserve. The Commission on the Future Policing did ask us to take a step back and to review how reserves are being used and how we use them in particular. We will undertake to do that, but I think the basic principles are sound. We just have to be clear with them as individuals about what they can expect when they join and what the contract is in effect, because we have to equip them and train them and give them explanation as to what their duties are likely to entail. And I think some may have a false view or of what perhaps that they might be doing, as opposed to what practically we can equip and train them for.
Yeah, if I suspect maybe some people watching and listening today mightn't be that even familiar with what the Reserve role is, or even what kind of hours do people put in, what are they doing? Could you give maybe a brief pen picture for people?
Well, we require 4 hours per week in terms of their commitment, and we also...
Is that every week, or does that sort of
well,
average out for people? Yeah.
Sorry,
in a general sense,
yeah,
I'm not into specifics, but it's not something everybody's familiar with.
From an operational perspective, generally it's a minimum 200 hours.
Okay.
over the year.
In a year,
Doesn't exactly transfer
yeah.
to 4 hours a week because most of them are in employment otherwise, so it depends on the schedule and what suits. They cover a variety of roles, like as the Commissioner said, particularly in the area of the nighttime economy and weekends. As I said, maintaining visibility, working in tandem with Garda colleagues. They also are in respect of major events, sporting, cultural events. You know, we use the reservists in that. It works well very much when they're kind of part of a unit and they're assigned to a unit. So generally, we try endeavour to assign them to a unit so they work the same with the same individuals. So it kind of brings around the team aspect of it. But then again, because they're volunteers, it doesn't always work that they're in a position to work with the unit. But generally, from the point of view of kind of ownership, it's around a unit. And you know, one of the things we're looking to do maybe is to recognise them through the joint policing committees. So in the region, the northern region, we're looking at maybe tabling it as an agenda item with the joint JPCs, where they can get a greater understanding of the role of the reserves, and also maybe move it towards some type of public acknowledgement, because although they're technically remunerated, they don't do it for the purpose of finance. It's more a sense of vocation in that, and we
it's kind of an
that.
allowance system, as I understand it. So what you're saying is really broad range of members of the public who might be interested in supporting the Garda. The role is there at the moment, and it's going to be sort of explored and developed for the future.
I think that's important.
And there may be further recruitment. Yeah,
the broad range, because people our experience has been that the most effective reservists are people who come in with a broad range of skills, life skills as much as anything else. So
obviously it's a very complementary role. So have you a view then on how it is operating, or how effective it is at the moment in terms of deployment of reserves, supervision of reserves, and integration with units on the ground?
Well, undoubtedly we can see pockets of good practice, but we have individuals then who give us a lot of time, but we've also conversely individuals who barely turn in for the duty. And you know, we have trained them and we have equipped them, and so that is a loss to us. We do require a commitment from individuals when they do join the reserve, and I think that's entirely reasonable, given that we have made an organisational commitment to them and bringing them into the organisation, and well, it's not employment, but joining the Garda Reserves. Really, if we didn't have the reserve, I think we'd be one of the few police services without some form of volunteer or reserve type capacity, and so it is an essential part of how we would provide the policing service.
Is there a challenge? I'm thinking, obviously, for a number of years was very little recruitment in the Gardaí, and you know, we're all familiar with the challenges austerity presented. You've had a lot of recruitment now in the last few years, and that, I would imagine, places challenges in terms of supervision and mentoring, in terms of full-time members. Does that put pressure on the capacity to manage and supervise reserves at the moment?
Well, I think one of the aspects, just one of the unintended consequences of opening up our own recruitment is we get less people interested in joining the reserve. When we had no recruitment,
course,
we had greater interest in joining the reserve, and people saw that as a vehicle then to move across into the regular service. So. So there's that aspect as well. So the fact that we are recruiting and actively recruiting has in some ways suppressed the recruitment to the volunteers, or to the reserve. So, but in terms of supervision, we're not in the place we were in that we've promoted there in the last month over 170 sergeants. So, our supervision ratio and the supervision there is out in the ground is improving. But practically then as well, a lot of our patrol complement working in the various units are either probationers or individuals not long out of their probation. But on the other hand then, reserves who are a little bit older and maybe a little bit more worldly wise can be a very good influence in the middle of all that as well. And so, there's a lot that they can contribute, just depending on their motivation and what they're able to bring to the organisation, and so, you know, by and large, it is very positive, and indeed some of them, you know, make a very positive contribution.
Okay, I understand in other reserve setups and other organisations, for example, in the military, there's a sort of a grade structure within the reserve. So there's a supervisory structure, if you like, within the reserve area. Is that something worth considering in the Gardaí, or is it appropriate?
And I have seen that elsewhere. I'm not entirely sure in that we seek to be one organisation, so both, you know, the Guard officers, members, and the reserves. And if we create another, in effect, rank structure, we'll not actually blend the organisation together. So I'm not sure about that. I think you just create further sort of cultural barriers to integration.
It was something that occurred. And in terms of, we talked about culture, in any organisation, when something like a reserve is introduced, there can be natural levels of resistance, and I think it's fair to say that that's probably has been the case when the reserves were first introduced in Garda Síochána. What's the status at this stage? Is it your view that the reserve members are accepted consistently across the organisation? Or maybe asking your colleagues, might be too early for you.
Well, yes, I think your initial observation is correct, but over time, I mean, you have to recognise that we have reservists now with over 10 years service. So I think if that was the situation pertaining for the last 10 years and it hadn't changed, I don't think we'd have so many reserves at that service. From an operation point of view, I see no variation. You can have a situation where, as I said, a uniformed sworn officer and reserve are working in tandem, doing the same thing. You can see no variation in type of work they're doing in kind of public events and public engagements. I suppose there are kind of nuances as well, to be honest, like when you see, we'll say events, social events, and the reservists are attending the social event. To me, that's probably a more telling sign of the acceptance, and I would have had a number of experiences of that where reserves, and they're seen as a key member of staff and everybody knows their name. So I can appreciate your observation, but I don't think it's...
I think it came through in the culture audit. There's still maybe a little bit of reserve about the reserves, we say. But so what do you think you can do about that?
Sorry, Valerie, if I can come in there. Look, I'm a little more closely associated with it on a national scale. And you're right, we have everything, you know, in between the two ends of the continuum in terms of what their experience has been within the organisation. What I'd like to start with, because I think it's an opportunity for us to communicate with the public as well in relation to this. Like, you know, we have the most extraordinary people in the Garda Reserve currently operating on the ground. And to go back to your previous question about whether or not we should have a rank structure within the reserve, and that's a decision that hasn't been made yet. I could certainly identify people within the reserve at the moment that could act as sergeants and inspectors if there was a structure in there. And I'm only saying that in the context of the quality of the people that we have in the organisation. Now, of course, we have the continuum of quality as well in terms of the Garda Reserve, as we have in the force itself. We have a lot of work to do around it in terms of creating an environment where they'll feel that they are completely valued within the organisation and that we're accessing their innovative and creative juices that they have from other areas. And that's what we're trying to exploit at the moment in terms of our planning. How are we going to facilitate that within the organisation? And part of that is going to have to be about looking at the regulations again in terms of their autonomy and giving them scope to go out and do the job that we're employing them to do. And somebody asked, like, you know, what it should be in the public domain, so they need to be visible, they need to be with the community, and they need to be operational. So having them indoors and doing stuff indoors where they're hidden away is not an option for us, really. They're volunteering for a public service. They want to be out among the community. So that has to be part and parcel of it. And the reason that I'm taking the lead on it is because we need to integrate it into the community policing framework. Where, along with the guards that are out on the ground that have ownership, responsibility and accountability for particular areas, when they turn up for duty, they're not hanging around waiting for somebody, you know, to pick them up and take them out, that they'll know exactly where they're going. We can task them in advance, you know, and they'll feel like, I'm going in to do a job in my area. You know, now my area might not be where they immediately live, you know, but they'll know that that's the area that they're responsible for, or they have some responsibility for. In terms of recruitment, We've a bit of work to do around recruitment, and you've heard some of the presentations that we've had here in the past in terms of how do we get into the communities and choose or select people from the community that reflect the makeup of that particular community. So
you've anticipated my next question. Is this an opportunity to bring further diversity?
And that will boil down to we've just come through a programme now where people are coming into the organisation. So look, this is going to be something that we'll face in 2019, where we'll have to determine a way of communicating that and marketing in such a way. The strategy that we're going to develop at the moment, and there is a draft strategy there, I expect that by early January we'll have a complete strategy around this. That we'll have to integrate the HR aspect of this, the recruitment, training, etc., with the actual operational end of it, and then we'll take on the operational deployment of it and looking after them out in the operating environment, and HR will look after the HR elements of it.
I think it just continues the whole discussion of the whole skill mix in the team, the mix between Garda members, Garda staff and Garda Reserve. And I suppose we look forward to seeing that brought together in some way in the HR strategy and in future strategies as well. So
but it's
we'll
really
leave it that
important
for today maybe. Okay.
It's really important to articulate the fact that some of the people that we have in the reserves are extraordinary people and they do extraordinary work for us. Absolutely.
And and I think we know that within this room, and it's important to get that message out publicly.
Absolutely.
And I think it's important to get the message out that, as you said, people from all sorts of backgrounds, ages, all diversity categories are welcome.
And we have the full range at the moment, but we're asking people to consider this as an option, and they all have their own reasons for doing it. But it really is, it can be really rewarding. And some of the people that I know that are in the reserve at the moment, they get great satisfaction out of what they do, but they contribute hugely to what we do.
Okay. Well, we'll probably take this up again, but thank you very much for that today. Very informative.
Thanks, Valerie. Commissioner, you may or may not be aware that as part of our stakeholder engagement, the authority has met groups, a large group of your reserve members, and certainly the kind of commitment that Pat described and their interest was very evident. But it would be fair to say, and again, I think that's been acknowledged by your colleagues, that their experience has been mixed. And perhaps in considering your next steps, you might also have a look at the hygiene factors. I think that there are some mixed messages there as well. So it's not just about deployment and valuing and uniforms, but it's also about getting the hygiene factors right. And I won't go any further than that, but I think it's important if you have a new group coming in, you have an existing group that are seriously committed, and they, as Assistant Commissioner O'Brien has said, have stuck with the programme for a long time, so their commitment is evident, and so it's important to recognise that as well, that some matters that might need a bit of tidying up could help enormously. But we do look forward to engaging with you on the strategy when you've thought it through, and I think the Commissioner's remarks about the need to think it through, Commission on Future Policing, was also in the MRP, so this has been around for a while, that this needed some reflection and thinking, and we look forward to hearing further from you when you've done that thinking. We're now going to move on, if I may, to the homicide review. This is a piece of work, as you know, that the authority has been engaged with now for some considerable time. We maintain it as a standing item on our agenda for the present at least, and including both in authority and in committee. And we have some specific questions around it that we'd like to discuss with you today, and Judith is going to lead.
Thanks, Chair. And Commissioner, just to reassure you, I don't intend to get into the detail of any individual cases, but we did have quite a detailed briefing in committee on Monday past, and the briefing gave rise to a number of issues that I just wanted to air with you in the public session. But before I get into the detail of it, could you just give us an update, please, on where you are with the review and the progress?
Chair, thanks very much. I'll just give you an overview of the status of where we are today. The first report of the first 8 reviews was published or was forwarded to you on the 12th of June. the second 8 reviews the 23rd of September, and the third report of 8 reviews into the investigations. Hopefully we'll be with you this time next week. It's at a very advanced stage. It's just been proofread by the full team. On the 9th of November 2018, our weekly conference was attended by Margaret Tumilty from your own and Interim Chief Data Officer Bill Limond, and they were brought up to speed with the progress of the reviews and data issues. The terms of reference number 2, which was review of all High Court outcomes for homicides 2013-2015 to ensure they are recorded accurately on Pulse in line with the official court outcomes. And I was asked this question at committee stage before, and I have hard figures in relation to that, and if I can quickly go over them. For the years 2013-2015, there was 98 charge sheets in relation to murder. 78 of them were accurately recorded on Pulse, 13 require a Pulse update, and 7 are currently before the court in relation to trial, appeals, or awaiting sentence. In relation to manslaughter, for the same time period, there was a total of 14 charge sheets. Between 2013 and 2015, 12 were accurately recorded on Pulse, 1 requires an update on Pulse, and 1 is before the courts again awaiting trial, appeal, or sentence. The dangerous driving / careless driving causing death for the same time period, a total of 122 charge sheets were reviewed 2013-2015. 97 were recorded accurately on Pulse, 9 require an update on Pulse, and 16 are again before the courts awaiting trial, appeal, or sentence. This is an ongoing body of work. In relation to our findings, recommendations, and fast-track recommendations, there were 15, but now there are, when you get report number 3, there'll be 17, an extra 2. Out of those 17 recommendations, 11 are around the data issue, data controls, poor data. 5 have investigative issues, and 1 is a policy. Now, some of them cross over into one another, so they're not just clear-cut investigative issues. They can impact on the other one. There was a comparative analysis for homicide figures between the officers of the state pathologists and the Pulse record for the year 2017. This has been undertaken and a draft report submitted. Again, it's another bullet point in our terms of reference. 167 state cases were submitted for the year 2017. 4 have investigative issues, and 14 require queries with either the investigating member, the senior investigating officer, and a further number have data quality issues. The same comparative analysis was conducted for 2018 up to the 2nd of November of this year. There was 164 cases up to the 2nd of November this year, and that compares to 167 for the full period last year. Now, 60 of those 2018 cases have been reviewed with the comparative study between what's on Pulse and what's in the pathologist's office. That's where we sit at the moment.
Sorry, if I can interrupt you, because that's a lot of detail just to digest at this point in time.
I'll put it on paper and let it out into you in a combined report.
Could I just focus on the recommendations that you mentioned there, because the last briefing on Monday we had was that there were 15 and now I understand there are 17, and I really do welcome the detail and the candour with which you have briefed the authority, Brian in particular. But our concern at the moment is not necessarily just with the specifics of the detail of the recommendations, it's more around the governance and the ownership, because each time, each iteration of the briefing we get on the homicide review, the list of recommendations is growing, and the concern is who is taking the recommendations forward, who has ownership of them, and who's making sure that the learning is woven into training, policy, etc.
Sorry, can I look to John, the Deputy, for that, please?
The owner of the policy in this area is Assistant Commissioner O'Driscoll. So in terms of pulling them all together, Assistant Commissioner O'Driscoll has been tasked with ensuring that all of the recommendations, all of the policy changes and all of the governance issues have been addressed.
But it's AC McPartland who has been owning the review, so there seems to me a lack of clarity as to who's actually leading on this particular piece of work.
In terms of conducting the review, AC McPartland was tasked with actually conducting the review and doing the piece of work that Brian Sutton, as the Chief Superintendent, is dealing with. Out of that come recommendations, and the recommendations then are a matter for the policy owner. And Assistant Commissioner O'Driscoll is the person who owns the policy in this area. So he's the chair of the crime training faculty in the Garda College. So Brian has dealt with addressed some of the issues to the training college for inclusion in the likes of the Senior Investigating Officers course for changes in the training for the incident room coordinator. But Assistant Commissioner O'Driscoll has overall responsibility for the change. He's the policy owner in this area, and not dealing with the specific tactical elements of looking at 41 individual cases. The 41 individual cases have been dealt with by Assistant Commissioner McPartland and Chief Superintendent Sutton. But when that leads to 15 or 17 recommendations, the governance and the oversight of the implementation of those is Assistant Commissioner O'Driscoll. And in particular in relation into the future of it, in terms of some of the issues that Brian has touched on, with how is it working at the moment. You know, obviously this is an issue that into the future, again, Assistant Commissioner O'Driscoll will bring forward.
So where is the implementation of the recommendations sitting now? Because we now have 17 recommendations, so how many are in the course of being implemented now as we speak?
They were broken up into 3 groups. Fast-track recommendations, findings and recommendations. The fast-track recommendations to stop it having a ongoing corporate risk to the organisation, they were actioned straight away. And we got the decision to action them, such as dead people recorded as being dead on pulse. That was something. And then, secondly, intelligence not being able to be created on pulse for somebody that is marked deceased. However, there are other training issues, IT issues that require an IT fix, that if I want to put something on about somebody that's deceased, that a pop-up menu should say this person is marked deceased since such a date, and making the person aware or the inputter aware of that. And that's an ongoing process. So we've identified them, we've nominated who we think from the review team is the process owner, and that's gone up for implementation, and Assistant Commissioner John O'Driscoll is actioning that. Okay,
so even if your recommendation is a recommendation around data, that's still John O'Driscoll who will lead on that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, he will lead out on it. He will lead out on it, yes, and he will be able to bring forward. It will fall within the remit of obviously the Chief Information Officer.
Yeah. Well, we're actually going to ask him to attend the next committee meeting just to hear directly from him what his plan is to deal with some of the risks that have been identified. And I think that leads me nicely into another element of that. The benefit and the experience of the recent appointment of Mr. Limond will be central to bringing all these issues to a kind of a conclusion, or to a position where we're all happy that into the future, that insofar as is possible, our process that is in place is sustainable, because we have many investigations every year with lots of different people involved with them, and mistakes will happen, and the obligation is on us as senior management to ensure that processes, the structures, the governance are in place to mitigate and minimise those risks, and that's part of the work, and we will be looking to him to bring forward specific suggestions and recommendations from his experience in other jurisdictions. I am very conscious of time, but this has been an issue that has been so central to public confidence, and certainly central to the confidence of the authority. So I've just a few more questions to ask. And probably one of the most serious risks that we have identified is around duplicate, triplicate and multiple nominals on pulse. In other words, an individual having more than one identity on pulse and the risks that surround that. So can you tell me how you're making sure that issue isn't getting worse going forward, and you've got your foot in the ball and you've stopped it getting worse, and there's a plan to mitigate the risk around that?
Yeah, what's happening with that, we're looking for pulse, there was pulse merger teams. And I can just take an example, John Kelly, a name, and he's convicted of a certain offence. And another John Kelly, or he's stopped, and another pulse instance or pulse ID number is created for him. There is pulse merger teams, or there were pulse merger teams before. What happened was, as time passed on, they faded. But the responsibility was given to the criminal intelligence officers in each of the districts or divisions throughout the country to monitor that, to keep an eye on it, and to be able to say, yes, this is the same John Kelly with two different pulse identification numbers, and to merge them together. And that's an ongoing bit of work. However, to say that it's not going on or that it's not continuing, I can't honestly put my hand on my heart and say that it's not happening today, that it could very well be happening. But it's been watched and it has been monitored.
And it's not unique to the Guards, I have to say. This is an issue in policing worldwide, but it's just simply about trying to stop the matter getting worse so as we're not revisiting the same situation in a year's time.
And I think the point you made there, Judith, at the end of it is it's not an issue that's unique to An Garda Síochána. It's tied in with a national identity card. It ties in lots of various different challenges present itself in this. I think what Brian is saying is what we're doing at a tactical level. Yeah. Again, our new interim chief data officer will hopefully bring forward.
We'll hear more about that in committee. Yes. Yeah. Two very quick questions. Just finally, what assurance do you have going forward that the classification issues won't recur and that the in-tray of misclassified homicides isn't refilling? And secondly, can you once again assure the authority that the review team, and maybe this is for you, Brian, you're working together with GSAS and your other disciplines in the organisation, and that this is a collective team effort and everyone has access to the case files as required to make their submissions?
Absolutely. This was one of the biggest issues that we had. We members of the team from different disciplines within the organisation. They were tasked accordingly to their strengths, and they came back. We have a weekly conference before any report is signed off on. Every member of the team has to agree to its findings, and that's what happens. And maybe that's what's causing some of the delay, because there is robust discussion. If an issue comes up in relation to a particular investigation, we may need to go back to the senior investigating officer. We may need to go to another police agency or another medical agency to get an opinion on a specific point. But it's clarified if, as was highlighted before, there is a professional difference between within the group, we have a third party that can adjudicate over that issue.
And the first part of the question was about the misclassification not recurring.
Misclassification, it's one of our strongest recommendations we're making in relation to the classification of deaths on the pulse system. That there are so many there, we're making a strong recommendation that they be reduced to 6 with smaller subcategories from it. Again, that has to be actioned.
By John O'Driscoll?
Well, yes, it will be fed through John O'Driscoll's team. It's an IT issue, it's an IT change that Pulse will have to do it, and it will feed into the Pulse changes that come on. But as the policy owner for this area, he is going to have to draw, and any policy owner will have to draw on other areas within the organisation who can enable and action the various different elements of it. But I think coming back, it was important from our perspective that we have one individual who has overall sight of all of the recommendations. Some of them can be fast tracked, as we've done. We've issued new HQ instructions. We've issued some training instructions. Some of them can be actioned in the short term, and some of them will be in the more will be medium to long term. And that's the piece of work that John has now been tasked with.
I just want to reiterate that, thanks to Brian for the candour and the detail of the briefings. It is really helpful in reassuring us of the real willingness to tackle this issue and to come up with solutions to it.
Thank you, Judith. And I suppose from my point of view, it's to repeat the review and the 41 cases is working its way methodically through the cases. But if the in-tray continues to fill, you'll never get to the bottom of it. And so we would have a concern that maybe might also have a look to see, are there behaviours around ongoing classification issues that have nothing to do with pulse? It's harking back to some of your earlier conversations, and I don't know that there are. I'm just saying, if it is continuing to happen, there has been serious, I think, public discussion, serious public confidence issues raised around the classification of homicides. You very kindly undertook to do an extensive backward look. Now it's the forward bit that's worrying me, because it's no good fixing 41 or reviewing 41 if it's continuing to grow. And I suppose just to consider whether that ownership issue could cause balls to fall in between various owners, between the owner of the review, the owner of the policy, the owner of the IT, the owner of the data. I was hearing, I felt myself trying to draw a map there. So I just leave it with you to think, or respond if you wish, John. But that is just our residual concern. Is that okay? Or do you want to respond?
No, that's understood, and it's very clear from the papers I have when we set out in this review, we wanted to make sure we didn't, in effect, as you say, keep on filling the bucket here of misclassification. And the processes are in place, and we have to see just how rigorous they are going forward. But I think it's like classification of everything on pulse. It has to be subject to, constant supervision and retesting, and validation of information on pulse will be an ongoing issue in terms of both identities, but also the accuracy of the data there. And we have a responsibility to that, and in effect, as long as we keep personal records, that'll be a responsibility that we have, and it applies to this as it does to other areas. And that's the work we're taking on at this moment, to improve our data quality and improve and with the systems that are coming online in the year 2019 that I've set out in the written report, that also will make a contribution in terms of data quality, in terms of the computer-aided dispatch, and also then the management of the investigations as well.
We do recognise that there are a lot of potential solutions contained in that new system, the rollout of that new system. So thank you for that. I'd like to move on now to the review that's ongoing in relation to the juvenile diversion programme. We've had a very useful briefing from you in private session in terms of the detail of the progress. I know the review is continuing, and a final engagement with you will be on another day, but we do have one or two brief questions, if you don't mind, and Moling is going to lead. I think Judith first. I beg your pardon.
Right.
Well, thanks again, Chair. And I would say again, thank you for the really helpful briefing on Tuesday and for bringing us up to date on the review. You'll know that this issue has been of considerable concern to the authority. In fact, we've already had 2 public meetings discussing the issue. And I guess the briefing on Tuesday raised a number of issues that we want to explore in detail once the review is complete. And we're going to return to this matter, all being well, in a public meeting in mid-January and hopefully discuss the risks emerging and your organisational response. But in the meantime, we have some high-level questions, and I want to reassure you they are at a high level. And obviously, without prejudice to any potential criminal or misconduct discipline issues arising, I would welcome your comments on these. So, just looking forward rather than backwards, I suppose, how have you assured yourself that the current procedures for youth diversion are sound, with robust governance and follow-up if there is an issue identified?
Well, the second 2 editions of Pulse 6.8 and 7.3 have in effect created a feedback loop, and in 2018 we have had no reoccurrence, and in effect even in 2017 this was completely tailing off, and that flags up in what I would describe in part as being an organisational or systemic failure in terms of a change in process, change in the work process, which wasn't probably subject to the explanation and training and then supervision that it required. So before I would go anywhere near the point around individuals and then the discipline issue, what we want to be sure of is actually just what did we do as an organisation that created the circumstances in which this might happen in the first place.
And with regard to the review then, what are your priorities over the next few weeks?
Well, I think we want to complete the review. We're very close to that, and that's an internal validation. And I know Pat has engaged in right across the organisation in terms of completing that, and our IT specialists and analyst specialists have been involved in that. But before then, we'd want to issue the figures. We want to be sure that our process was sound, so an element then of external validation of the process that we engaged upon. So we are sure, in effect, of our numbers, and then we will be able to go public with those and use the policing authority public meeting in January as a means of explanation and exploration of this topic.
And we would welcome that. Moling may have additional questions to add, but just final question from me. Can we have your assurance then that the review will be complete in time for a public meeting mid-January, and not just in time for the night before the meeting, but in time for the authority to have adequate time to read, digest, understand and question you on it for that public meeting mid-January?
Well, we ourselves, we're within, I'd say, 2% in terms of the total we have to examine a finishing point, and we wish to engage an external body just to validate that process. So, we are confident that the third week in January should be a reasonable finishing point for us in terms of that.
Third week in January might be cutting it a bit fine. Okay, well, we'll welcome an update as the review progresses, and we can react to that accordingly. I don't know if Moling has any further questions.
Yeah, not specifically anticipating what might come out of the final review or the final report, but I just have a couple of questions in relation to the committee appointed to monitor the effectiveness of the diversion programme. And up until today, we've had to rely on the 2016 report, which wasn't published until February of 2018. I find today you've got the 2017 report published this morning. Any reason for such a delay, a 14-month delay in terms of publishing the 2016 report?
There's always been a delay, Moling. That seems to be the way it was. I took up there in 2017 and we were always playing catch up, and we've shortened the delay in 2017, and I would expect in 2018 we'll have shortened it again. But it seems to be just the practice that, there was a significant time lag between the time the year ended and we actually got the report out.
And I know you appreciate that the greater the delay in publication, the less relevant the material that's there in terms of public conversation about the significant issues, and so I'll be very conscious about that. Now, the committee has a statutory underpinning the Children's Act, and the terms of reference for the committee: monitoring the effectiveness of the diversion programme, reviewing all aspects of its operation, monitoring all ongoing training needs of the facilitators and so on. And the reports themselves are full of significant and very interesting information. But I'm certainly conscious in terms of reading the 2016 report, and in the midst of what appeared to be a significant issue coming out of the Professional Standards Unit and its report, seemed to be a very sort of anodyne observation in the report, and indeed not in terms of my quick glance at the 2017 report, not anything of any greater note in that particular report. I would have anticipated that in the context of one, probably the key role of monitoring the effectiveness of the programme, that would have called for at least some observation or some anticipation of the work you're currently doing.
There certainly is an observation in the 2017 report in relation to it, but we were reporting on the 12 months beforehand. In 2016, coming into it, the report, the GPSU report, was delivered in mid-2017. So really that's when the flags went up that we need to have a look at this and we need to explore deeper. So look, 2016 certainly would have been done and dusted. In 2017, there's certainly a reference to it in the 2017 report, but it really is about dealing with the high-end element of it there before we get into the detail, which will be in January 2019.
And I recognise and would acknowledge the significant work that Assistant Commissioner Leahy has put into this particular area, and the huge amount of work involved in the review process that you're currently undertaking. Just putting a question out there, whether there might be some thought to an external chair of this committee. For the 2016 report, you had 2 external on the committee, and yourself and another chief superintendent. There's now just 3 as far as the 2017 report would suggest. But against the backdrop that you're responsible for the actual programme, I'm wondering, might some thought be given to an external chair?
Some thought will certainly be given to us. It's already been discussed.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that, Commissioner. And it's reassuring that while this work is ongoing, it's really the same point as the homicide. While the work is ongoing, that the in-tray is not filling.
No, it's not.
And that's very important, and we thank you for that, and we're very pleased to hear it. I have a couple of very brief but maybe significant other business questions. I wonder, is there anything you could say to us about alleged child sexual abuse involving Scouting Ireland? I think all of Ireland took a very deep breath yesterday when this came into the public domain. Again, I'm not asking about cases. I just would like you to see if there's anything you can tell us about whether the Gardaí have been engaged on this matter, and whether you have investigations underway, or anything that you might say that could reassure the community, because this has kind of scared people, I think.
Well, we are actively engaged with the review, and obviously then, our primary duty would be the investigation of crime within that, and that will happen as in effect the complaints are made. So understand that we are there, and we just, these situations are very sensitive, and we have to work with the victims and the review team and take it step by step. So I don't want to make any bold statements about where we are now. Of course. But people should be reassured that yes, we are fully engaged with this.
Thank you for that. I think that is reassuring. We had 2 quick AOB items. One was, again, they're standing items really. The Crowe Horwath report, we got it, thank you. Too late to read it, but we got it and we will read it and we'll be back to you. But thank you, Assistant Commissioner Sheehan, we did get it. And then the learning from An Cosán, is there any updates you'd like to give us on that, or should we leave it over?
Well, I think the one point is we're subject now to an inspection, obviously, in respect of our response to public order incidents. I would like to get a position where we've completed, in effect, the learning from the various incidents that have been referred to in the inspection process, and we get to a final position in respect of our policy. It's not fair that the inspection body, in effect, are inspecting a moving target. And so over the next few weeks through our senior leadership team meetings, we'll finalise where we are with that, and then we can report back, and we'll report, obviously, to the inspection process. Well,
the inspection was initiated by ourselves, as we told you at the last meeting, and we were expecting a report from the Garda Inspectorate in March. So
yes,
we'll come back to it at that point. Thank you. Any of my colleagues want to add anything or ask anything? Commissioner, at this time of the year, there's often sort of reassuring messages you want to give to the community, or activities you want to share. Is there anything you'd like to say before we adjourn?
Well, there are obviously we have our seasonal campaigns. The road safety campaign for Christmas will be a joint launch with the Road Safety Agency on the 29th of November, and I'll be engaged as that, along with staff from Roads Policing. That's very important. in terms of keeping people safe on the roads and as we enter into the festive period, and will see increased enforcement on part of An Síochána around Christmas time. Also then, we've also decided on a approach of trying to increase our visibility on the ground in the commercial centres. And so the squad or the class which passes out next Friday, instead of being assigned directly to their stations, will be assigned to 5 hubs where they'll provide high visibility policing in our major cities and towns. So, and that'll be through the period of December. Plus then we will have a mobilisation of our administrative personnel in terms of guards who are engaged in administration and using them for high visibility patrolling in town centres. And that's about helping obviously with traffic flow, reassurance, but also about preventing crime as well. So we're engaged in that, and as I've said already, we have passing out parade next Friday, so that's another 182 officers out onto the ground, and that's very much to be welcomed.
And we wish those new officers well in their assignment and wish everybody a safe driving in the context of your road safety campaign. So with that, we're adjourned, and our next meeting in public will be an additional meeting in January. Normally we have it in February. We'll have it in January to consider the final report in relation to the juvenile diversion programme. Thank you very much.